Hey guys, thanks again for joining us for another week of OK Now John. This week we continue our series that I'm calling You Meant for Evil. Last time we talked about Joseph and his brothers and how God worked out his plan through their evil decisions. Recall our series verse in Romans 8:28. It says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." This week we will go over the story of Job and discuss a Christian teaching and principle called concurrence. Now, concurrence is a big word that basically teaches and describes how multiple parties or people can act in the same event, ending in one result, without all parties having the same intention or goal. Let's look at Job's life. Chapter 1 of the book of Job tells us that Job was a righteous man and an upright man who loved God. One day, God called to assemble all of his angels in heaven, and Satan appeared there before God. And in verse 8, God initiates the conversation with Satan by saying, "Have you considered my servant Job?" And then Satan goes on to slander Job and God by saying that the reason for Job's faithfulness is because of what he gets out of it, not because of a sincere attachment and love for God. Satan says that the only way God can get people's worship is by bribing them with riches. And so God, having slanderous charges against him and Job, permits Satan to attack Job's property and his children. Satan moves through the evil intentions of people called the Sabaeans and the Chaldeans. Now, these people were jealous towards Job's property and his riches, and so Satan kind of stirred up their jealous hearts and tempted them to go steal Job's property. So the Sabaeans and the Chaldeans went and they stole all of Job's property, all of his livestock, killed most of his servants, and then Satan sent a storm, like a tornado, a strong wind as the Bible says, to kill Job's children. And so Job is now without his property and without his children, but he remains faithful to God. And so Satan goes back up to heaven with his tail tucked between his legs, and he's kind of like saying, "Okay, fine. Job didn't curse you to your face like I said he would. But if you allow me to afflict him with pains and sores and sicknesses, then surely he will curse you to his face." And God says, "Okay, go ahead, do it. The only thing I'm going to ask of you, Satan, do not take his life." And so Satan says, "Great. So I'm free to do anything I want to with Job." And God says, "Yes, just don't take his life." And Satan says, "Great." And so then he afflicts Job with all of these sicknesses, and his three friends come and give him advice, and his wife tells him to go curse God and die. And through all of this, even though Job is suffering, and even though Job questions the goodness of God, he still remains faithful to God. And so this story of Job shows us the power of God and how God works. God can ordain evil, but his intentions are always good. When we talked about concurrence, right? We talked about how multiple parties can act in the same event without having the same intention, right? Well, let's look at the intentions of each party in this story. Satan's intention was to discredit Job and to dishonor God. The Sabaeans and the Chaldeans' intentions were to get rich off of Job's property. But God's intention was to clear Job of all guilt, bless us with wisdom, and glorify himself. And at the end, God shows us that his plans stand far above our understanding. And sometimes God allows and even ordains our pain and our suffering, but we as Christians have the assurance of God's love and promise that all things ultimately work together for the good of those who love God. For Job, he was vindicated, cleared of all guilt, and had his property and children and health restored to him twofold. He had double what he had to begin with, and he had a far more profound and awesome understanding of the God that he worshiped than he would have had he not gone through what he did. And even for us, we have this story as a reference point and a reminder to always trust God's plan, to always rest in the promise that, as Romans 8:28 says, all things work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his glorious purposes. I love you guys, and I'll see you guys next week with the final week of our devotion.